Standing on the hard-packed dirt of the eastern Mojave, it's hard not to feel at peace. The quietness of the desert air is a rare luxury in 21st century America. The stillness of the region stands in harsh contrast to the hustle of the Los Angeles basin. With little stimulation aside from a light breeze or occasional cicada to break the silence, it's easy to let your mind wander. Thoughts of what the region must have looked like when it was crisscrossed with lakes and grasslands only a few thousand years ago are difficult to conceptualize. In a way, the desert's current condition feels timeless. The few communities that dot the barren terrain still in a way feel like frontier outposts, clinging to survival against a cruel and inhumane environment. To most travelers on Interstates 15 and 40, however, the only thing linking these oases is a whole lot of nothing. If you aren't stopping, the Mojave consists of nothing more than a blurred mass of grays and browns, stared half-consciously at while cursing the lack of cell reception. As such, the desert is, to most, a temporal tax collector, levying a fee of 2.5 hours of monotonous travel to anyone just trying to get through it all. However, to the south, the ghost of Route 66 offers a more intimate perspective. When travel is slowed, and the mind begins to put the pieces together of what makes this region so special, a different picture emerges. Not that opportunity lasts long before another train appears. After all, for all the talk of self-reflection or deeper meaning, you are here for the trains. Due to that perceived emptiness, though, the Mojave has a more subtle allure, and often ranks low on the priorities of railfans visiting Southern California. For a first-time visitor especially, the desert is often an afterthought, a spectacle that will be best served to be visited on a future trip. After all, why would you choose to forego such legendary locations as Cajon Pass, Tehachapi, or Beaumont Hill to go here? This video aims to answer that question. The Mojave contains a wealth of historical intrigue, breathtaking scenery, and high-speed action, and BNSF's relentless battle with 120-degree desert heat, gale-force winds, monsoonal downpours, and 4 steep grades makes for one of the most incredible displays of railroading on the planet. We hope that after experiencing the desert for what it is, you too will come to appreciate it the same way we have for the last 20 years. Welcome to the Ultimate Desert Railroad. This is the Needles Subdivision. Formed in 1995 as the first of the mega mergers that swept the railroad industry during the latter days of the Clinton administration, Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railway, later renamed to BNSF, is one of the largest transportation companies in North America, with a network of 32,500 miles. However, we'll be focusing just on the 171 miles between Barstow and Needles, California, which makes up the entirety of the Needles subdivision. Originally constructed by the Southern Pacific to block the Santa Fe from entering California, today, the Needles subdivision forms the core of BNSF's rail network in the state, and serves as a vital component of its so-called Southern Transcon. Eastbound trains begin their journey across the Mojave at the road's massive terminal in Barstow, California. The tracks here form a giant Y, with the Needles sub going east, the Mojave subdivision to Bakersfield heading northwest, and the Cajon sub to West Riverside heading southwest. Union Pacific trains to Las Vegas and Salt Lake City have trackage rights from West Riverside to Daggett, 4 miles east of Barstow. From Daggett, BNSF trains pass through Mineola, Newberry Springs, and Hector, before beginning the climb up the west slope of the hill to Pisgah. After cresting the grade in the shadow of Pisgah Crater, eastbounds curve through Lavic before arriving at Ludlow, where another climb, this one to the summit of Ash Hill, begins. Just east of the summit at Ash Hill proper, the main line divides, with westbound trains taking the original track in and around Klondike, and eastbound shooting straight down the new grade to reconnect with the westbound track at the timetable location of East Siberia. Trains continued downgrade through Trojan and Baghdad before arriving at a town left behind by the construction of Interstate 40, Amboy. Bolo Hill is the next grade eastbound trains must face, and after passing one of the few online industries along the subdivision at Saltus and the top of the grade at Bolo, eastbounds immediately shift into heavy dynamics, racing downgrade into Cadiz. Here, the former Santa Fe line to Phoenix, now operated by Genesee and Wyoming's Arizona and California Railroad, connects with the BNSF. At Danby, eastbounds begin the torturous climb up to Goffs summit and pass through Essex and Fenner before throttling down upon arrival at Goffs. From the summit, it's all downgrade into the Colorado River Valley, as trains pass through Homer, Ibis, Kleinfelter, and Java before reaching Needles. A wide variety of traffic crosses the Needles subdivision. This is an intermodal train, and the primary kind of traffic visiting railfans will see along the southern transcon. Intermodal freight takes advantage of standardized containers to seamlessly transfer cargo between road trailers, train cars, and ships, and BNSF handles two kinds of these trains. Ocean-going ships transload 20, 40, and 45-foot containers onto well cars at the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, and long consists of these imported, double-stack containers head east to bring goods from Asia to the rest of the United States. Domestic intermodal trains principally utilize 53-foot containers to transport parcels cross-country for companies like J.B. Hunt, Amazon, Walmart, and Swift. BNSF's Hobart and San Bernardino A yards handle these trains, and the hottest train on BNSF's Southern Transcon, the Los Angeles to Willow Springs, Illinois ZLAC WSP, is normally filled to the brim with these cream-colored United Parcel Service containers. Holiday traffic increases the number and length of these trains, and peak season on the Needles subdivision in late November sees over a dozen of these hotshots, racing across the desert to meet tight, two-day shipping deadlines. Manifest, or mixed freight traffic on the Needles subdivision, is heading to and from the road's massive Barstow classification yard. Classification yards work by breaking up incoming traffic into blocks of cars that are then sent on trains heading to other destinations. For westbound manifests, their journey will end in Barstow, with their cars being sent to Los Angeles or the Pacific Northwest, while eastbound manifests are heading to yards in Illinois and Texas, among other locations. Unit trains of ethanol are destined for BNSF's main facility in the Port of Long Beach at Watson. The hopper car behind the locomotives is a buffer car, used to put distance between the train full of flammable liquid and the locomotives up front. The National Transportation Safety Board, or NTSB, requires the use of buffer cars to keep crews safe and prevent the explosive ignition of fuel. Autorack trains carry finished vehicles from Mexico and the southern United States to California for market. BNSF has two main hubs for its auto traffic, one in San Bernardino and one in Richmond. BNSF also handles Toyota imports from San Diego, and many of these autoracks head east to Clovis, New Mexico for reclassification. Grain trains are among the heaviest trains to operate on the Needles subdivision, and are heading to the San Joaquin Valley south of Fresno to be used as livestock feed. The locomotives in the middle and rear of the train are remotely controlled by the lead locomotive, and are known as distributed power units, or DPUs. Sometimes BNSF needs to shuttle intermodal cars to terminals without having revenue freight loaded on them. These repositioning moves are colloquially known as bare tables, and can either consist of empty flat cars or well cars loaded with empty containers. BNSF runs a repo train from Phoenix to San Bernardino daily to shuttle empty containers, and this normally operates over the Arizona and California Railroad at night. Finally, two types of passenger trains can be seen on the Needles subdivision. This is an officer special, or O train. BNSF uses these trains to ferry members of their board of directors to and from terminals in Southern California. Amtrak also operates passenger service over the Needles subdivision, though normally only at night. Westbound train number 3, the Southwest Chief, can sometimes run late enough to be seen in daylight. When the train is this late, it often has freight power put on its front to help assist it to its final destination at LA Union Station. Locomotives used on BNSF's Needles subdivision are typically high-horsepower 6-axle units. Engines from Wabtec Corporation, formerly General Electric, dominate the fleet, with units from Caterpillar Corporation's Progress Rail, formerly Electromotive Division, occasionally mixed in. BNSF boasts the most modern locomotive fleet in the country, with 5 main types viewable on any given day. Even with the fleet decimated as hundreds of lease-expired units are purged from the roster each passing year, GE's C44-9W still forms the backbone of BNSF's motive power pool along the Southern Transcon. The Dash 9 is the flagship of GE's 4th generation of heavy-haul locomotives that began with the Universal series of diesels and cranks out 4,400 horsepower from an FDL prime mover. General Electric's Evolution line of diesels was introduced to BNSF in August of 2003 with 26 pre-production AC4400 EV units, but the 7600 series of ES44 DC units were the first serial production GEVOs to appear on the Southern Transcon. Evolution series units were developed to meet EPA emission standards, and the 4400 horsepower GEVO prime mover in the ES44 DC meets so-called Tier 2 requirements. Introduced in 2012, the ES44 C4 is a radical departure from previous 6-axle locomotives on BNSF in that, at least part of the time, it isn't a 6-axle locomotive at all. The type is equipped with A1A trucks, where the center wheel can be raised and lowered depending on the need of the train. This theoretically gives the best of both worlds, with higher tractive effort on steep grades and less wasted power on flat running segments. However, despite the ingenuity on paper, BNSF train crews have tended to disparage the C4s for their poor tractive effort at low speeds. BNSF generally ignored these complaints for a decade, but finally relented and responded by, starting in 2023, ordering units with traction motors on all 6 axles, bringing the C4 experiment to a close. The ET44 series are the newest Wabtec-built units in the fleet and meet strict EPA Tier 4 emissions standards. The locomotives accomplish this by using an exhaust gas recirculation system to pump the gas made during combustion back into the engine cylinders, purging it of pollutants. This system necessitates extremely high temperatures to function, so the ET44 has massive radiators to compensate for the additional heat generated by the EGR process, and many of the units on BNSF's roster have scorch marks from where the paint is blistered. Introduced in 2005 as a successor to the SD70 Mac, EMD's SD70 Ace produces 4,300 horsepower from a 710 prime mover, and features additional pollution control measures like their GEVO counterparts. Initially, the type was bought by BNSF for hauling unit trains of coal out of Wyoming's Powder River Basin to power plants across the country. With many of these plants switching to natural gas or being replaced with renewable energy, ACEs were dispersed across the system, and now routinely show up as trailing units and occasional leaders on BNSF trains. Barstow Yard is the second largest terminal in California and serves as both a marshalling point for manifest traffic from the Los Angeles basin, as well as a crew change point for trains operating to and from both LA and Bakersfield. From Barstow, eastbound trains pass through the timetable stations of East Barstow and Nebo before reaching Daggett, where UP trackage rights trains depart for Las Vegas and Salt Lake City. This section of track covers 6.3 miles with an average grade of 1%. Track speed is 70 miles an hour, and the main line is triple-tracked CTC. Barstow is originally known as Waterman and sits alongside the Mojave River, a mostly below-ground channel which flows northward out of the San Bernardino Mountains. The river shares its name with the Mojave Basin, an expansive series of deserts and mountain ranges that spills into most of southern Nevada and far northwestern Arizona. From atop B Hill, visiting railfans can take in the grandeur of the basin and witness firsthand the struggle that humanity undertakes to survive in this inhospitable environment. Colonial interest in the region was sparse in the decades after the seizing of California from Mexico, but the discovery of silver and calico, several miles downriver, brought both miners and railroad interests to the town. In 1882, the Southern Pacific arrived from its terminal in Mojave at the base of the Tehachapi Mountains. The SP was in the area to tap into the silver and borax mining industry, but the road's directors had other plans as well. Racing westward from Albuquerque were construction crews from the Atlantic and Pacific Railway. The A&P had originally been chartered in 1865 to link Springfield, Missouri and the Colorado River, with a clause in the charter stipulating that the Southern Pacific was to connect with the new line around the California border. After a false start in the 1870s, construction resumed as a joint venture between the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe, and the St. Louis and San Francisco. The A&P then pushed west from Ailita, south of Albuquerque, across the Colorado Plateau and up and over the San Francisco Peaks to reach the Colorado River at Needles. At the same time, Southern Pacific completed their charter obligations and built across the Mojave to meet the Atlantic and Pacific. The two roads joined rails in Needles in late 1882, but the SP refused to forward freight through the A&P connection, with Santa Fe's own freight often being mishandled or lost on its journey west. A takeover of the Frisco by SP Chairman Collis P. Huntington resulted in an agreement where the A&P terminated its plans for westward expansion, with Santa Fe left with a hostile connection at its terminal. In 1883, Santa Fe President William Barstow Strong announced that the Santa Fe would build west anyways, paralleling the SP across California and to San Francisco if necessary, and this announcement forced SP's hand. Huntington had found his company with enormous debts from construction, and the two companies began negotiations to turn over the Needles line to the Atlantic and Pacific. A lease was finalized in August of 1884, with the road taking over the line to Waterman. The continued reliance on the SP for access to the LA Basin, however, left traffic levels low. Santa Fe needed a way to access the coast with its own trackage. To the west, Santa Fe's ally, the California Southern, had pledged to connect with the road at Waterman, and built north from National City to Colton in 1882. But catastrophic flooding in Temecula Canyon south of Riverside in 1884 left the line severed and the company bankrupt. Santa Fe stepped in to finance the completion of the route over Cajon Pass, purchasing the California Southern and bypassing attempts by the SP to cut off their approach. In 1885, the last spike in Cajon Pass was driven, and Waterman Junction became a critical intersection of the road's lines to San Diego and San Francisco. In honor of his accomplishments as president of the Santa Fe, Waterman Junction's post office was renamed to Barstow, the name the town has carried ever since. In 1897, the Atlantic and Pacific was reorganized into the Santa Fe Pacific Railroad, which was absorbed into the Santa Fe in 1902. The Needles Subdivision was finally purchased from the Southern Pacific in 1911, and Barstow has retained its importance to the functioning of the railroad throughout all eras of ownership. Originally, Santa Fe planned to build their yard for handling borax from Calico at Daggett, but in response to these plans, local landowners dramatically raised the price of their property. This caused the railroad to locate their facilities closer to Barstow, with the yard being constructed on the east side of Bee Hill. When the facility was built, it was used to break up and sort westbound trains from Kansas City and Texas, and reclassify eastbound freight from the LA Basin and Central Valley. At the time, Santa Fe's network had no yard between Barstow and Kansas City that could handle reclassifying trains, and Barstow Yard itself was small in comparison with other terminals in California, having only 30 tracks for sorting carload traffic. To handle projected increases in freight traffic, the road invested over $50 million, equivalent to nearly $350 million in today's money, in creating a brand new classification yard. Starting in 1973, the modern Barstow Yard was constructed to the west of the original yard, with 3 times the capacity of its predecessor. When the new yard opened in February of 1976, its centerpiece was a computerized hump, one of the first of its kind in the country. Cars being sorted at the Barstow hump are pushed by yard engines to the top of a hill, where individual cars are separated by a crew member on the ground. When disconnected from the rest of the train, gravity moves the cars down the 6% grade into one of the 48 tracks at the bottom, known as the bowl. Retarders slow the cars down to allow for coupling at a safe speed, and individual cars are sent to their designated track by automatic switches controlled by Barstow's yardmaster. From here, trim jobs take the cars to the departure or D yard. Manifest traffic arriving at Barstow is forwarded to the receiving or R yard, where the road power is disconnected and the train is taken by yard engines to be reclassified at the hump. Inbound road power is then sent to the extensive locomotive servicing facilities that are located on the western side of the new yard. Santa Fe's steam facilities were demolished entirely during the 1960s, and when the new yard was built, a state-of-the-art diesel shop came with it. Today, the Barstow shops are BNSF's most important locomotive servicing location in California. The shops feature 8 through tracks for performing 90-day inspection and light repair on the diesels assigned here. In times past, an agreement with the South Coast Air Quality Management District prevented older 6-axle locomotives from traveling into the LA Basin, so many older engines would need to be cut off and inspected here before returning east. Locomotives not needing inspection or repair will be fueled and have their sanders refilled here. Just south of the locomotive shops is a 2-track intermodal yard opened by BNSF in July of 2019. The terminal, a $27 million investment, was designed to help relieve truck traffic off of California Highway 58 and Interstate 40 by providing an alternative for high desert warehouses. The Mojave has increasingly become an important logistical center for Southern California, as coastal land is in short supply. And while plans for a similar facility on the grounds of George Air Force Base in nearby Adelanto had faltered, the new terminal has thus far been a success. Bee Hill and the Mojave River combine to form a choke point on the eastern end of the new yard. The line narrows from 17 tracks to 8 before fanning out again as it crosses underneath First Avenue. BNSF uses the old yard as outflow storage, so trim power will often be found moving cuts of cars to make way for new trains to be sorted. This was the original location of Waterman Junction. In times past, the Southern Pacific route from Mojave crossed the river here and connected with the California Southern's main line from National City. The alignment was moved to the west end of the new Barstow Yard in 1974, and today, nothing remains of the bridge. Lost too was the original First Avenue Viaduct, which was deemed unsafe and replaced in mid-2024. Luckily, Barstow's iconic station has stood the test of time, though the site is no stranger to the necessity of building new structures. Originally, a wooden depot opened here in May of 1887, but this was burnt to the ground 2 months later. Its replacement was burnt down in 1892, and another replacement burnt down in 1908. Finally, the current station, known as the Casa del Desierto, Spanish for House of the Desert, was constructed out of fire-resistant material and opened in 1911. The station was one of the famous Harvey houses that catered to passenger needs across the Santa Fe system. Fred Harvey began building bespoke restaurants in Santa Fe depots in the late 1870s, and his network of eateries would become famous for their fine dining. Over time, however, changing travel habits and the shifting of passengers from trains onto the parallel highway and later interstate system caused the once reliable railroad business to falter. The Fred Harvey Company was acquired by Xanterra in 1968, with many of its restaurants shuttered with the decline of Santa Fe passenger service. Barstow was no exception to this trend, and Santa Fe closed the station in 1973. Fortunately, the city of Barstow acquired it in the 1990s. Today, the depot serves as a nightly stop for Amtrak's Southwest Chief and hosts both the Western American Railroad Museum and the Barstow Route 66 Mother Road Museum. A live stream camera is also located on the second floor of the structure and allows for railfans from across the country to witness the constant flow of traffic gliding past the station. In 1944, an interlocking plant called East Tower was constructed just east of the depot to help expedite trains in and out of the old yard. Interlocking towers hold mechanical levers thrown by a tower operator to move switches and light up signals to govern train movements, but all towers on the Needles Subdivision main line have been rendered obsolete by the introduction of Centralized Traffic Control, or CTC. CTC works by using radio to operate switches and signals, and dispatchers in a remote office can view trains on a monitor to appropriately line them up. BNSF handles dispatching duties in a joint facility with Union Pacific in San Bernardino, and this allows for closer coordination for the section of BNSF track that UP trains operate on between Daggett and West Riverside. Shortly after the Atlantic and Pacific began operations on the Needles line, Union Pacific began to probe into the Mojave as well. The road's Oregon Shortline subsidiary had surveyed a line south from Salt Lake City to Moapa, Nevada, but the Panic of 1893 had caused the OSL to go bankrupt and the grade had been left abandoned. E.H. Harriman, the chairman who helped reorganize the UP out of bankruptcy, was eager to connect the Los Angeles basin with the rest of the UP system and authorized a survey from Las Vegas south to Daggett, but the UP would not be alone in the Mojave for long. On March 20th, 1901, the San Pedro, Los Angeles, and Salt Lake Railroad was incorporated to build a rail line between San Pedro, California, and Salt Lake City. Owned by mining mogul William Andrews Clark, the line was in strict competition from the get-go, with Union Pacific's tracks reaching Caliente, Nevada later that year. SP, LA, and SL surveyors successfully plotted their own line up and over Cajon Pass to a spot called Otis, now known as Yermo, but ran into difficulty figuring the grade in the desert and needed to abandon the route past the Calico area. UP, by contrast, had looked to bypass the Cajon area by negotiating trackage rights on the Southern Pacific Sunset route to the timetable location of Banning. Here, a new line would cross Morongo Pass and Ash Mountain to reach the Oregon Shortline survey, but the proposed route was prohibitively expensive and was abandoned. Given tensions between Harriman and Clark over ownership of the railroad, and Clark's own preference for building the line to Salt Lake City with as little of his own money as possible, an arrangement was made where the SPLA and SL would be split evenly between Clark and Harriman. When the ink dried on July 7, 1903, the Salt Lake route was transferred to joint ownership, and construction began to pick up steam on the UP survey to Las Vegas almost immediately. In May of that year, the SPLA and SL's request for trackage rights between Daggett and Colton was approved by Santa Fe President E.P. Ripley. In 1905, the route was completed, and it quickly became a critical link between the UP's overland route and Los Angeles. While it's faded from its heyday in the late 1990s, intermodal, export coal, and iron ore traffic still snake through the junctions at Nebo and Daggett to exercise their trackage rights. The junction at Nebo is typically used for westbound UP trains. The BNSF Barstow terminal dispatcher will hold UP traffic here until main number 1 is clear of BNSF trains. Nebo was originally known as fish ponds. In times past, a series of small ponds was located here, but these were wiped out when the Mojave River flooded in 1938. The area was renamed by Mormon settlers after Mount Nebo, a peak located in what is now Jordan. Daggett was named after John Daggett, a lieutenant governor of California, and originally was known as Calico, but the name was changed to avoid confusion with the nearby mining town. When the Atlantic and Pacific took over operations on the Needles Line, Daggett was the most important station on the subdivision and a major source of borax traffic. To handle the sheer volume of ore mined in the Calico Mountains, a two-story depot and interlocking tower was built at the junction of UP's Los Angeles subdivision. After a fire destroyed the depot and tower in May of 1963, the duties of operating the tower were moved to East Tower in Barstow, and eventually to BNSF's San Bernardino Dispatching Center. For visiting railfans, it's hard to beat parking in Daggett and waiting for the trains to start racing by. With upwards of 15 movements on the Los Angeles sub and 60 on the Southern Transcon, the sheer volume of traffic pounding through the quadruple-tracked junction makes Daggett one of the busiest railroad locations in California, a constant river of freight in this otherwise desolate landscape. From Daggett, the Needles subdivision passes by Coolwater and Mineola before arriving at Newberry Springs. East of here, the tracks cross Troy Dry Lake and begin their climb up the west slope of the Katy Mountains at Hector before reaching the top of the grade at Pisgah. From the summit, eastbounds race through Lavic and Ludlow before beginning another climb, this one to the summit of Ash Hill. This section of track covers 49.1 miles with a maximum grade of 1.1%. Track speed is 70 miles an hour, and the main line is double-tracked CTC. Past the junction at Daggett, eastbound BNSF trains get to stretch their legs. The route is relatively flat and straight from here to Hector, allowing for running at track speed. However, for westbounds, the area can often be a parking lot. Coolwater is one of the most common places for westward movements to stop before being sent into the terminal at Barstow. The siding here was originally constructed in 1977 to serve the now defunct Coolwater Pace 520 power plant. BNSF currently uses the spur for storage, and when the agreement with the South Coast Air Quality Management District was in place, older road power would be cut off here. BNSF specifically prohibited all road units built before the year 2000 with over 3,000 horsepower from operating south of Barstow, and Dash 840CW number 947 fits that description on this afternoon in May of 2014. Disconnected from the SLPC LBG it just brought across the desert, its brakes are set to wait for a yard job to return it to Barstow for servicing. Of course, traffic still needs to flow, and before the westbound can depart, an eastbound train charges by on main number 2. Before BNSF installed CTC on the entire Needles subdivision in the early 2000s, the main between Daggett and Ibis was controlled by automatic block signaling. Unlike CTC, where indications can be set remotely by a dispatcher, ABS only indicates to a train crew whether a train is in the next block of signals down the line. In order to be overtaken by faster movements, Santa Fe trains would need to be given verbal instructions by a dispatcher to enter into a siding off the main line, since the ABS on the Needles subdivision was set up to only allow eastbounds on the south track and westbounds on the north. CTC fixed this problem by allowing bidirectionality on both tracks, and higher priority trains will now switch between either track if there is space to thread between opposing traffic. Like many places in the western United States, the arrival of the railroad to the region caused many settlers to relocate to the Mojave River Valley and set up homesteads. The accessibility of water has made the valley relatively unique in that it's self-supporting, allowing agriculture to flourish. Sparsely populated as the area is, in the late 1890s, the Southern California Improvement Company took steps to develop the valley into what they termed the Pittsburgh of the West through the construction of a canal. Though the project failed, Santa Fe still borrowed the name Mineola, named for a company officer's wife, Minnie, for the station here. Even without the canal in operation, the valley remained vital for the supply of water to the rest of the Mojave. In addition to the distinctive pink ballast mined in the Newberry Mountains, the springs at Newberry, just east of Mineola, were essential for supplying Santa Fe's thirsty steam engines and lineside communities. Although the arrival of EMC-FT diesels in the run-up to World War II eliminated the need for boiler water on the Arizona Division, east of Newberry, most permanent communities along the Needles Subdivision had their drinking water supplied by tank cars filled from the waterspouts located here. Gradually, Santa Fe offered to pay for wells to be dug for remaining residents along the line, and the delivery practice was discontinued in the early 2000s. While above ground the Mojave is dry, water's past presence still helps facilitate transportation through the region. East of Newberry Springs, the tracks cross Troy Lake, the first of several dry lake beds that the line races across. At the end of the last ice age, meltwater from retreating glaciers filled valleys across Nevada and California, forming a chain of large lakes that helped support a dazzling array of prehistoric flora and fauna. As the lakes dried and temperatures increased globally, the process of desertification turned the once permanent fixtures of the Mojave to a series of ephemeral basins. The Needles Subdivision takes advantage of these lake beds to maintain a minimal gradient, and the section east of Newberry is home to the fastest running segment of track on the subdivision. Hector lies at the eastern shore of Troy Lake and at the foot of the Cady Mountains. The mountains were named for Major Albemarle Cady, a local garrison commander in the frontier days. Hector was originally known as Haskell, but the name was changed to Hazlitt in 1882 and then to Hector on June 4, 1899. A telegraph and train order office was built here in 1906 and closed in 1923. Hector also lends its name to hectorite, a clay with a high concentration of lithium found in a mine south of the station site. Like the borax at Calico, hectorite is part of the massive amount of mineral wealth in the Mojave, and the mountains that tower above the tracks here have been combed by both prospectors and corporations for well over 150 years. On October 16, 1999, a 7.1 earthquake struck the area around the hectorite mine at 2:46 a.m. Amtrak number 3, the westbound Southwest Chief, was just east of the summit at Pisgah when the quake hit, causing 22 of the 24 cars on the train to derail. Miraculously, the engines remained on the tracks and only 4 passengers were injured, and a temporary slow order to facilitate repairing the line was lifted after only a few days. Not that trains break speed records passing through here, however. After all, between Hector and the top of the grade, the Needles Subdivision rises over 300 feet as it crosses up and out of the Mojave River Valley. This is the first of 4 grades that the route is cursed with on its journey to the Colorado River Basin, and while nowhere near as steep as Goffs Hill to the east, locomotives are still pushed to their limit as they work to keep their tonnage moving over the crest of the hill. West Pisgah sits at milepost 707.3 on the Needles Subdivision, and is at the point where Interstate 40 crosses over the tracks. Like Newberry Springs, the siding here once facilitated the loading of open-top hoppers with ballast, but unlike Newberry, the rock mined came from a cinder cone volcano to the southwest. Pisgah Crater is the newest volcano in the Lavic Lake volcanic field, and was mined extensively in the years following the arrival of the railroad, so much so that nearly 100 feet of its height was removed in total. While Santa Fe initially owned the mining rights to the crater, they sold it to the Canadian company CanCal Resources in the 1990s. Today, CanCal mines the volcanic cinder here for agricultural use. US Route 66 crosses the BNSF tracks at Pisgah. Originally, drivers would follow the Santa Fe route as closely as possible to make use of line-side services. As the road network developed, what was then called the National Old Trails Road was rerouted away from the railroad right-of-way to roughly parallel the tracks. By 1926, it had been reorganized as a U.S. highway and fully paved across the Mojave. When the Dust Bowl swept through mid-America in the early 1930s and created the largest refugee crisis in American history, the road became a lifeline for escaping farmers fleeing to the San Joaquin Valley. By the time John Steinbeck made his own journey along 66 in 1937, the road had cemented itself as a major transportation artery across the Mojave. Indeed, when I-40 was authorized as part of the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, it coexisted on the same alignment as Route 66, only being gradually replaced with new-built highway in phases until its completion through the Mojave in 1973. 66 was turned over to the local government in 1985, and it remains the only numbered county road within San Bernardino County. The curves here mark the point where the tracks depart the Lavic Lake volcanic field and enter the Broadwell Valley. The Bullion Mountains rise in the distance, with the Marine Corps base at 29 Palms occupying the vast majority of their square mileage. True to their name, when Santa Fe roadmaster John Suter went into the mountains south of Ludlow to search for water, he instead discovered a rich vein of gold and copper 7 miles south of the tracks. After Suter sold his claim in 1901 to shareholders of the New York Central Railroad, the Baghdad Mining and Milling Company was incorporated to develop the claim and transport ore to the mills in Barstow. At the same time, another claim in the area, this one discovered by John R. Gentry, had been purchased by Benjamin E. Chase. Chase merged the Baghdad Mining and Milling Company and his own Benjamin E. Chase Gold Mining Company to form the Baghdad Chase Gold Mining Company. Baghdad Chase then built a railroad north to the Santa Fe tracks in Ludlow. Operations of the Ludlow and Southern started on June 15, 1903, with the L&S hauling over 150,000 tons of ore by 1910. At the end of that year, declining mining revenues caused Baghdad Chase to sell its stake to the Pacific Mines Corporation. The mine was heavily upgraded during this time period, but the Great Depression rendered it economically unviable and the mine was idled. The L&S's rails were lifted in July of 1935, and its sole remaining engine, Baldwin 060 No. 1, was scrapped on site in 1937. While the mine was sporadically operated from the 1930s until 1954, trucks were exclusively used to transport ore for refinement, and today, little remains of the railroad grade. Located midway between Lavic and Ludlow, Arctic was named as a tongue-in-cheek reference to the extreme temperatures found in the region. Renamed Argos in May of 1907, the station hosted a post office and small settlement until the arrival of the Tonopah and Tidewater at Ludlow caused the community to uproot and relocate itself down to the junction point. The T&T was founded by the same mining interests that had helped develop the Calico area's borax production. Francis Marion Borax Smith spent much of the late 1800s consolidating his mining empire in eastern California and southwestern Nevada, culminating in the 1890 purchase of rival William Tell Coleman's assets around Death Valley and Calico. Reincorporated as the Pacific Coast Borax Company, Smith's venture began to tap into Coleman's claim east of Calico, which had fittingly been named Borate. To reliably transport ore from the mine to Daggett, a narrow-gauge railway was constructed by the PCB to the Atlantic and Pacific Main Line in 1898. Named the Borate and Daggett Railroad, it began hauling freight by the end of that year, but by 1901 the mining activity at Borate was deemed unsustainable and an alternative source of borax was needed. While the famous 20 mule teams that hauled borax from the Death Valley area to loadouts at Mojave and Daggett had been sufficient in the late 1800s, Pacific Coast once again turned to rail to solve their transportation problems. In July of 1904, the Tonopah and Tidewater Railroad Company was incorporated to haul borax from the Lila C mine in Death Valley. Initially, PCB had partnered with the SPLA and SL to transport ore from the mine to Las Vegas, but in August of 1905, Santa Fe president E.P. Ripley cut a deal with Smith. Ripley wrote that if the T&T would start its construction somewhere along the Needles District, he would give PCB a discount on construction material deliveries. Despite protests from Clark, Ludlow was selected as the new terminus point for the road, and the right-of-way out of Las Vegas was abandoned that month. From the west end of Ludlow, the T&T was built north across Broadwell Lake and up and over the Bristol Mountains across the SPLA and SL at Crucero, where, pursuant to the crossing agreement made between the companies, an interlocking tower was built at the Tidewater's expense. Punching through the Amargosa Canyon north of Baker, the route began operations from Death Valley Junction on September 1, 1907, and on October 30th of that year, the last spike was driven in Gold Center, Nevada. Ludlow boomed as the Santa Fe interchange point for both the T&T and Ludlow and Southern. While initially nothing more than a group of tents adjacent to the Santa Fe section house and water tank, a two-story depot was eventually erected to serve as the Tidewater's headquarters in town. The T&T's arrival cemented Ludlow as a thriving desert oasis, and the road's facilities included a shop complex for servicing engines, a locomotive shed, tool, ice, and water storage, as well as a section gang's headquarters and the relevant lodging and eateries. Ludlow for a time was actually larger than even Barstow. However, the discovery of a massive deposit of highly pure borax northwest of Kramer Junction in 1926 spelled doom for the Death Valley mining operations and Ludlow itself. Despite attempts to market the area as a tourist draw, the T&T's operations wound down as the new mine in boron eclipsed most borax production in the Mojave. On October 8, 1933, the endpoint of the Tidewater was moved to Crucero and the route to Ludlow was mothballed. During the Depression years, traffic levels continued to decline, and on May 13, 1940, the Interstate Commerce Commission ruled that the abandonment of the T&T could commence. The last northbound train from Crucero left on June 14th, and in 1942, the U.S. government officially ordered the rails removed for wartime use. By February of 1943, the last of the rail had been lifted, and after a clerical error had been corrected, the road was finally, formally abandoned on December 3, 1946. To this day, the inspection pit for the Tonopah and Tidewater shops survives in Ludlow, and the road between Ludlow and Crucero closely parallels the company's still visible right-of-way. PCB's successor company, Rio Tinto, still ships borax out of the mine at Boron, and many of the hoppers loaded there pass through the mostly abandoned community of Ludlow on their journey to market. Immediately to the east of Ludlow, the tracks begin the climb up the west slope of Ash Hill. Ash Hill was named for Benjamin Ash, a Southern Pacific Railroad surveyor that died of thirst while plotting what was then called the SP's Needles Branch. In August of 1881, the SP Colorado Steamship Company steamer Mojave arrived at Needles from Yuma. Aboard were SP Chief Engineer William Hood and 30 surveyors, who were to meet the survey and grading gangs already working their way eastward from Mojave. On February 12, 1882, track laying commenced, and while Hood and his crew were finalizing their survey, SP's tracks raced across the desert to Waterman on October 23rd and Ludlow by December of that year. With the A&P fast approaching at Needles, construction moved rapidly, reaching Goffs on March 19th and Needles by April 11th. 8 days later, the last spike was driven, but in their haste to intercept the Atlantic and Pacific, SP had made a critical error. The charter for the Atlantic and Pacific explicitly specified that the line be constructed with rails of the best quality, manufactured from American iron, but over 50% of the rails used on the Needles branch were made from British metal. Confronted with the severe cost of replacing the rail on the line and Santa Fe's ironclad resolve to build west to San Francisco anyways, Huntington relented and negotiated the terms of the Santa Fe's lease with the company. As Santa Fe couldn't afford the $7,271,000 payment up front, the company instead paid 6% annually, and traded its stake in connection to the Sonora Railroad for the Needles branch. Today, bridge abutments from the original SP grade can still be found at both Argos and East Ash Hill, and outside of the major grade realignment east of here, trains more or less follow Hood's initial survey to Needles. From Ash Hill, the main line begins to descend into the Bristol Valley. The track split just west of Klondike, with eastbounds taking the new grade while westbounds take the old. At East Siberia, the mains reconnect, and the tracks pass through Trojan and Baghdad before arriving at the base of the grade in Amboy. Immediately to the east of the station site, the next climb to Bolo begins, and engines are put into run 8 as they pass by Saltus. This section of track covers 37.3 miles with a maximum grade of 2.3%. Track speed is 70 miles per hour, and the main line is double-tracked CTC. Ash Hill sits at the crest of the grade out of the Broadwell Valley. On BNSF's timetable, the station is divided into 2 control points, West and East Ash Hill, which sit at either end of an 8,066-foot controlled siding. The siding, which was connected to the Needles Subdivision CTC in 2003, is occasionally used as far-flung outflow storage for Barstow Yard. The Y at Ash Hill was used to turn steam engines from the helper pool based in Baghdad, 17 miles east of here. With the advent of bidirectional diesels, most Y tracks were eliminated from the Needles subdivision, along with helpers themselves for a time. This would force both dispatchers and train crews to sometimes couple trains together for the long climb up to the summit of Ash Hill. But by the 1980s, the helper pool had been re-established in Needles, and pairs of SD40-2s would remain on the rear of heavy westbounds up and over both Goffs and Ash summits. Today, distributed power units have eliminated the need for most manned helpers on Ash Hill. The cut at East Ash Hill marks the beginning of the 1923 grade realignment. With the end of the First World War, Santa Fe invested $14 million, equivalent to nearly $266 million in today's money, to significantly upgrade its mountain districts to help alleviate bottlenecks and smooth out helper operations. West of Colorado, Santa Fe built 212 miles of new track on either existing alignments or new right-of-ways, and the 9.7 miles east of Ash Hill is one of the most impressive engineering feats of this project. From the summit, the original SP main line immediately curved to the north and followed a series of washes down to Klondike, crossing over the dry waterways 4 times in 3 miles. Hauling in hundreds of tons of aggregate, Santa Fe replaced the curvature with a fill straight as an arrow, allowing for a faster and more efficient climb up to the summit. Now, a century later, BNSF has embarked on a project that, like Santa Fe before it, is fundamentally transformational for the character of the grade over Ash Hill. Segments 3 and 4 of BNSF's $100 million third main track expansion project started work in 2023, and the centerpiece of the undertaking is 11 miles of new main along the westbound track between Siberia and Ash Hill. East Ash Hill will itself be moved from its present location to the western end of the new track, with the money saved from its relocation being allocated to extend the siding an additional 5,000 feet to a new control point and crossover. Thus, the new 4-track straightaway to CP Klondike will provide for increased flexibility and allow for westbounds to be held off the main at Ash Hill. This is milepost 682.9, the point where tracks 1, 2, and the original grade to Ash Hill all converge. The old station site of Klondike sits just east of the junction on Main 1, and the future site of CP Klondike lies 1.6 miles to the west at milepost 684.5. However, the spot where the tracks reconnect doesn't have a station name or control point. From this conspicuously unnamed spot, the eastbound main heads due south on a much more direct path into the Bristol Valley than the westbound track, which skirts the foothills of the Bristol Mountains. Both are named for the SP timetable location of Bristol, near the current site of Bolo. From here to Cadiz, the openness of the valley offers railfans unprecedented views of distant trains that are difficult to find anywhere else in California. This field of view affords us the first look at the only local train on the Needles subdivision. At Cadiz, 27.6 miles to the east, Santa Fe's cutoff to Phoenix connects with the main line. When Santa Fe trains ran through instead of interchanging with the Arizona and California Railway, the locals that operated to Parker and Phoenix were called a variety of names as Santa Fe naming conventions shifted, and the train was variously called the Parker Local, 708 train, and MBAPX. When Santa Fe's ownership was truncated to Cadiz and BNSF took over, its symbol was changed to the LSCA 1161 before its current nickname, the Cadiz Turn, was established. After the Van Buren Yard to Barstow MJAC-BAR was annulled in 2009, the train was the last mainline bastion of BNSF's high-horsepower 4-axle locomotives on the Southern Transcon. Because of this and its predictable schedule, it became a favorite of railfans for its use of GP60s, GP60Ms, and B40-8Ws, until 6-axle GEs finally displaced the venerable units in the early 2020s. Heading up from West Siberia on Main 1, westbounds face a continuation of the 1.42% grade they've been climbing since Amboy, but for eastbounds, the station represents an easing of the 2.3% grade they've been following since the split. The difference in both speed and gradient profile helps to highlight the intensity of railroading here in a unique way, as westbounds can be seen for a half hour or more working their way upgrade as their eastbound counterparts race by at track speed on the near track. However, CTC allows for a flipping of this script, as light westbound trains with over 2.5 horsepower per ton available can sometimes find themselves with a lineup to charge up Main 2. Like many operations involving long stretches of trains operating wrong main, this can be a delicate task for BNSF dispatchers, who will need to hold any eastbound traffic at East Ash Hill to allow for the hotshot to cross back over. The time saved can be worth the complication though, as while gentler than Main 2, the original grade is anything but easy. As part of the 1923 construction project, Santa Fe also replaced the original set of 10-degree curves west of Siberia with gentler 6-degree ones. At that time, Santa Fe ran a westbound train of brine from the plants at Saltus to Newberry Springs for purification. Nicknamed the Salt Shaker, the tank car train provided a loaded westbound counterpart to the water trains operating east of Newberry, but the super elevation of the 10-degree curves would cause the brine to leak out of the cars and spill onto the tracks. Any train following the Salt Shaker up Ash Hill would have significantly less grip on the rails and struggle to make the grade, which baffled Santa Fe officials until the leaking brine was discovered to be the culprit. The new grade still offered a challenge for BNSF engineers looking to add a third track due to the extensive earthwork required. In total, over 400,000 cubic yards of dirt were needed to build out the new right-of-way between West Siberia and Ash Hill. Indeed, the amount of dirt needed for the 11 miles between Siberia and Ash Hill was equivalent to the total amount of dirt needed for the 30 miles of third main between West Needles and Goffs. While normally the source for that earth would be a pit somewhere away from the tracks, BNSF and contractor HDR discovered that, by lowering the height of the access roads that paralleled the railroad through this area, they could use that dirt to build up the necessary height to build a second track at this location. The Bristols north of Klondike were the last major hurdle in the construction of Interstate 40 between Barstow and Needles. Given the challenges of constructing the highway through the difficult terrain east of Ash Hill, and the severity of traffic on Route 66, in the 1960s, a radical proposal for using peaceful nuclear explosions, or PNEs, to carve out the mountains was proposed. Part of a broader push for peaceful harnessing of nuclear energy called Project Plowshare, Project Carryall was meant to be a demonstration of nuclear construction methods at scale and to help finish I-40 across the desert. A joint study was carried out by the Santa Fe and California State Division of Highways, which proposed using 22 nuclear bombs for the excavation, with a combined yield of 1,730 kilotons, 115 times the yield of the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The bombs would, when detonated, create a 330-foot deep cut for 2 miles through the steepest part of the Bristols. In addition, a 23rd bomb would be used to create a large drainage crater to avoid the time and expense needed in producing proper drainage for the new alignment, and cost estimates of the proposal were $28 million lower for the nuclear option versus conventional construction methods. But amid mounting concerns as to the project's effects on the local environment and communities, and the signing of the Limited Test Ban Treaty, the project was abandoned, and the route over the Bristols was completed without the use of nuclear power. West Siberia is not immune to the changes sweeping Ash Hill. As part of the triple tracking project, the existing crossovers will be ripped out, and the control point will be moved 1,000 feet to the east to accommodate a new set of universal crossovers. The shift erases the last vestiges of Siberia from the Santa Fe days, though the former community had long been abandoned. Like many towns alongside Route 66, the rerouting of highway traffic through the desert caused business at Siberia to dry up, and the residents moved out. Today, the station site, named like Arctic and Klondike as an ironic reference to the Mojave's climate, sits empty. For many years, however, the last remaining vestige of the station, a single palm tree, stood vigilant alongside the Needles sub-main until its eventual passing in the late 1990s. Like many past icons of the Mojave, the palm at Siberia has long since been swept away by the inevitable passing of time, but those who are there to experience its stubborn persistence have immortalized it through photos. Since the beginning of the Santa Fe's time in the Mojave, heat has been one of the most destructive forces working against the railroad and its personnel. In addition to the danger that 120-degree temperatures pose to train crews, track warping can be a significant concern during the hottest part of the year. Thus, whenever temperatures rise above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, heat speed restrictions can be implemented to help prevent derailments, and MOW crews are kept busy all summer inspecting and repairing heat kinks. When Santa Fe built a siding midway down the hill between Siberia and Baghdad in 1902, they initially called it Nome. The site's name was changed to Haines a decade later, and to Trojan in 1925. While no longer appearing on the BNSF timetable, Trojan remains a favorite spot for visiting railfans. From this point, trains can be seen cresting the hill at Bolo, 12 miles distant, and can be followed across the valley to this location. The mountains across the valley from Trojan are the southern extent of the Bullion Mountains seen previously at Lavic. Like Lavic, the Bullions border one side of the valley at Trojan, and a lava flow borders the other. Dish Hill, otherwise known as Siberia Crater, is a complex of 3 cinder cones. Like Pisgah Crater, the cones are part of the 52 vents of the broader Sima volcanic field. In the distance, the much more famous volcano of the Bristol Valley, Amboy Crater, looms above its namesake town. Baghdad was founded with the arrival of the Southern Pacific in 1883 as a base for helpers assisting westbounds to the summit of Ash Hill. While named after the Iraqi capital, the H in Baghdad was removed for the convenience of train crews and dispatchers, and the spelling, sans H, proliferated throughout the region. Baghdad is also notable for having recorded the driest period of any American town in the 20th century. Between July 1912 and November 1914, no rain fell for 767 consecutive days. Despite the hostility of the surrounding environment, Baghdad bloomed for a time as an important community along the Needles district. A Harvey House lunchroom was built in the depot in 1889 and principally was used by Santa Fe helper crews. Along with the depot and locomotive facilities, a school, service station, and eatery, fittingly named the Baghdad Cafe, were all built during the town's peak years. However, the end of Santa Fe's steam helper service in 1941 over Ash Hill spelled doom for Baghdad. By 1943, the train order office had been closed, and the town endured a slow, inexorable decline until, one by one, the last remaining buildings were razed by vandals. This left, like Siberia, a single palm tree that lasted just until the turn of the 21st century. Despite this, the legacy of Baghdad lives on in popular culture. In 1988, the Baghdad Cafe was reimagined by German filmmaker Percy Adlon, who renamed the Sidewinder Cafe in Newberry Springs as the setting for the film of the same name. To this day, the Baghdad Cemetery remains, the bodies interred here resting peacefully until another train thunders by. While it wasn't immortalized as a movie star, Amboy, just down Route 66 from Baghdad, has fared marginally better in the post-Interstate 40 Mojave in that, unlike Baghdad, its survival wasn't solely dictated by the needs of the railroads. Founded by mining interests in 1858, local legend states that the town got its name when, during a conversation between two railroad employees about the heat, one commented, "Sure is hot," and the other responded, "Sure am, boy." Unlike the borax mine from Dry Lakes to the north, the salts found on Bristol Lake are sodium chloride, and were mined from both surface deposits and subsurface brine via evaporation channels. One of the most notable employees of the salt mines in Amboy's early days was Roy Crowell. When driving west to Los Angeles in 1924, Roy and his wife Velma's car broke down in Amboy, and to pay for repairs, he found employment as a mechanic, while Velma worked in a cafe. Finding that they enjoyed the town, the Crowells stayed and opened a garage of their own, and invited both their daughter, Bessie, and son-in-law, Buster Burris, to move to Amboy as well. In 1938, a room in the garage was converted to a cafe, and Roy's, one of the most iconic locations along Route 66 in California, was open to the public. When a new salt mill was opened in Amboy in 1940, the town grew to be the largest between Barstow and Needles, and after Roy retired, Buster took over and purchased the entire community. The new owner's antics also became the stuff of legend. During the height of Santa Fe passenger service along the Needles district, Buster would take tires from his shop and haul them up to Amboy Crater, lighting them on fire to make passengers believe the extinct crater was about to erupt. As both Amboy and nearby Chambliss were dry towns, he called the crates of beer he smuggled into the community cartons of eggs to keep up appearances. In 1989, facing a decline in both the town's viability and his health, Buster put it up for sale. In 1995, Amboy was sold to Timothy White, but after Buster died in 2000 and the new owners defaulted on their payments, the property was taken back by Bessie. It was sold again to Albert Okura, founder of Juan Pollo, a restaurant chain in the Inland Empire, and when he died in 2023, his son, Kyle, took over as owner. Any restoration of Amboy to its former glory, however, has long been stymied by access, or lack thereof, to water. Amboy was the last community along the Needles subdivision still served by water trains, and until 2004, the Cadiz local would switch a spur on the west end of town to deliver cars for the thirsty residents here. At this point, eastbounds have descended over 1,300 feet from Ash Hill, and have reached the lowest point between Barstow and Needles. East Amboy is the site of a 9,359-foot controlled siding that is often occupied by westbounds waiting for traffic to clear in Barstow. Upon cresting Bolo Hill, westbound trains will contact the BNSF Mojave dispatcher in order to be given lineup instructions for their journey into the yard. Saltus was founded in 1910 as the site of a spur to the Crystal Salt Company's salt mill. The suffix "us" was added to salt to distinguish it from other salt-centric locations in the Mojave. Brine is still loaded out on the spur track, though most of the surrounding mine infrastructure has been destroyed. This is the west slope of Bolo Hill. From here to the summit, trains face a 1.01% grade as they climb up and out of the Bristol Valley. As mentioned previously, Bolo was originally known as Bristol, then Bombay, and when it was moved to its present location, Bengal, before arriving at its current name in 1915. Bolo was the intended terminus for the Santa Fe's route to Matthey, Arizona, but as the road approached the area in March 1910, it was realized that the last 6 miles of track from Cadiz to Bengal was in essence duplicate trackage and passed through SP-owned land, so the line was instead truncated to Cadiz. Today, Bolo survives as a nondescript but perfect location to witness trains climbing up and out of the Bristol and Cadiz valleys. The Arizona and California Railroad operates over 240 miles of track in its namesake states. At Matthey, AZRC trains interchange with BNSF's Phoenix to Williams Junction P-Vine, and their road trains head west through Aguila, Wendon, Vicksburg, and Baus before arrival at the crew change point in Parker. After crossing over the Colorado River Bridge, trains pass through Vidal, Rice, and Chubbuck before reaching Cadiz. The maximum grade on the railroad is 1.6%, track speed is 40 miles per hour, and the main line is single-tracked. The Sonoran Desert west of Phoenix has always been rich with economic promise. After building south from Ash Fork to Phoenix in 1895, Santa Fe interests began to tap into the region to take both advantage of a mining boom in the Harquahala Mountains and as an alternative to the steep grades found on the original Atlantic and Pacific route across Arizona. On September 10, 1903, the Arizona and California Railway was incorporated to build from Matthey to the Needles District at Bengal. ANC surveying crews then laid out a pair of alternatives between Matthey and what would later become Parker. Selecting the southern route, which passed through the sparsely populated Granite Wash Mountains on a 1.6% climb, grading began on March 3, 1904, and track laying commenced 8 months later, reaching Siloam by May of 1905. Mixed train service began in July of that year, and after a delay caused in part by catastrophic flooding elsewhere in the Santa Fe system, construction resumed in October, with major focus being made on the 240.7-foot tunnel at Harkivar. However, even as the tunnel was completed in March 1906, Santa Fe's relative lack of interest in the line was beginning to become obvious. The ANC had always been intended to be the western counterpart to the road's Belen cutoff, but construction crews were drawn away from the Phoenix line to New Mexico, and construction stalled until a year later. Finally, when crews were repatriated to the route, Parker was reached on June 17, 1907. As the chosen point of the ANC's crossing of the Colorado, Parker was the terminus of the railroad for over a year while construction crews worked on the impressive through-truss bridge over the river. While finished in 1908, the bridge was effectively a stub track, while an economic downturn again stalled construction. In September of 1909, grading resumed once more, and after the route's terminus was realigned from Bengal to Cadiz, the line was finally, officially opened on July 1, 1910. Despite Santa Fe's grand ambitions for the line to provide an easier route the same way the Belen cutoff had done a few years prior, the planned construction between Deming and Phoenix to connect the cutoffs was never completed, and the economic potential of the region remained untapped. Thus, the ANC, which was incorporated into the Santa Fe in 1911, was principally used as a shortcut between California and Phoenix. As Santa Fe looked to rationalize its system in the 1980s, the ANC was a prime target for casting off. On March 22, 1991, Park Sierra Rail Group purchased the route, as well as trackage rights into Phoenix from Santa Fe. Park Sierra was acquired by Rail America for $48 million on November 6, 2001, and Rail America was in turn acquired by Genesee and Wyoming on October 1, 2012. Today, the Arizona and California's Green and Cream SD40M-2s have been replaced with G&W Orange-9s, and while traffic levels have dipped in recent years, the character of the bridge route remains firmly intact. Upon arrival in Cadiz, the Arizona and California crew pulls their power down the Y to drop off their Barstow-bound freight in the interchange yard. The tamarisk trees that surround the yard used to provide a windbreak for the two-story depot on the north side of the tracks. The structure had originally been built at Bengal in anticipation of the ANC's arrival, but was moved to Cadiz in 1910, closed in 1967, and demolished in 1970. Today, the only railroad structures left in Cadiz are the water tank and a prefabricated shanty to provide some much-needed shade for the crew switching out the yard. The Cadiz turn pulls into the west end of the yard. Like the ANC train before it, the local train will drop its cars off on the Y before pulling back around to couple onto its counterpart's tonnage. After receiving permission from the dispatcher, the local departs for Barstow. Immediately to the east of Cadiz, eastbounds begin the long climb up to Goffs summit. For the next 37.4 miles, trains will be in run 8 as they struggle to keep pace up the 1.12% grade, passing through Danby, Essex, and Fenner. From Goffs, eastbound shift into heavy dynamics as they head down a steeper 1.4% grade through Homer, Ibis, Kleinfelter, and Java before reaching Needles. This section of track covers 70.6 miles with a maximum track speed of 70 miles per hour, and the main line is double-tracked CTC to Goffs and triple-tracked CTC to Needles. At Cadiz, trains leave the Cadiz Valley and swing northeast to run between the Ship and Marble Mountains. Unlike Amboy and Baghdad, Cadiz has persisted due to the presence of water. The Cadiz Aquifer is one of the largest known reservoirs of below-ground water in the United States, and in times past has supplied Santa Fe steam engines on both the Needles and Parker districts. Like Owens Lake to the north, plans for tapping into its supplies by Los Angeles Basin interests have ebbed and flowed with the state's water needs for the last 2 decades. Initially, a pipeline to transport water was argued by the federal government to have not needed the Bureau of Land Management's approval due to it being contained within the Arizona and California's right-of-way. However, a 2019 ruling found that the arguments for the pipeline providing a railroad purpose, including operating a fire suppression system and hydropower generation for signals, were not adequate to justify the use of the railroad right-of-way to eschew BLM approval. Despite this, construction has resumed on the pipeline network in 2025 to help supply the incessant thirst of Southern California. Danby is one of the so-called alphabet towns that, starting in Amboy, continued in order all the way to Java, just outside of Needles. Like Cadiz, Danby served as a water stop, but unlike Cadiz, its water came from a spring 5 miles to the northwest. Bonanza Spring sits in the Clipper Mountains and is the only wetland of its type within an 1,000 square mile area of desert. It, like most of the railroad right-of-way east of Pisgah Crater, sits within the Mojave Trails National Monument. Created on February 12, 2016, the monument straddles 2 other preserved landscapes, Mojave National Preserve to the north and Joshua Tree National Park to the south. To the east, the Old Woman Mountains rise above the tracks between Danby and Essex. Until 1906, Essex was known as Edson. It was named for Alfonso Z. Edson, the postmaster at Cadiz. Essex was a base for miners heading up into the Bonanza King mine in the Providence Mountains, one of the richest deposits of silver ever discovered in the Mojave. George Gorman and P. Dwyer discovered the vein in the Providences in the spring of 1880. The claims changed hands a few times before the mine was sold to the Bonanza King Consolidated Mining Company for $200,000. With the arrival of the Southern Pacific in 1883, silver began to be shipped via rail, and by the middle of 1884, the mine had produced nearly $1 million, equivalent to $33 million in 2025. Bonanza boomed as tens of thousands of dollars worth of silver were extracted from the vein, with upwards of 500 people residing in the town adjacent to the mine. A brief work stoppage in spring of that year due to fluctuating silver prices was made worse by a catastrophic fire that July that burned the mine and rendered it unworkable. While a railroad was surveyed out to the site, nothing came of reactivating the claim until 1906. That year, the Trojan Mining Company reactivated the mine, but the company pulled out within a year, leaving the mine again unworked until 1915. Hal Rawister and Company of Massachusetts reopened the mine and operated it until 1920, and after one last attempt to reopen it in 1923, it was finally closed for good in 1924. The old National Trails Highway crosses over the Needles subdivision on a 1930-built bridge to reconnect with Interstate 40 at the point where the highway crosses the Paiute Mountains. The Paiutes forced the subdivision to travel due north towards the Landfair Valley to circumnavigate the extreme elevation gain that would otherwise be necessary to proceed east towards Needles. Fenner was once an important hub for the carrying of mail via wagon across the Mojave, and when the SP arrived, they used the site as a railhead for supporting silver mining operations in the Old Woman Mountains. The post office here was reopened 4 separate times between 1892 and 1928. Today, Fenner remains the last stop for weary travelers looking for a quick bite to eat before tackling the drive to Ludlow, 60 miles to the west. Unlike its more infamous counterpart to the northwest, Sima Hill, Goffs Hill does not have an extensive history of catastrophic runaways. While this is due in part to the summit's easier gradient, Santa Fe's signaling on the hill in later years also played a role in preventing trains from accelerating to uncontrollable speeds. Santa Fe had previously implemented automatic train control, a system that used both cap signals and automatic block signaling across its main line in Illinois to comply with a 1922 Interstate Commerce Commission order. However, a second order in 1947, which dictated that any line where trains operated faster than 79 miles per hour needed either automatic train signaling or automatic train stop, forced Santa Fe to upgrade the signaling along the Needles line. The road ultimately selected the cheaper ATS for the project. ATS works by mounting small metallic inductors next to the engineer's side of rails at signal locations. These devices, normally inert, are activated by a magnetic shoe mounted to the front truck of an equipped locomotive. As the train passes, the inductor sends a signal to an alarm in the train's cab, which, if not turned off within 10 seconds, forces the train to set its brakes and come to a complete stop. The installation of ATS allowed for the running of heavyweight passenger trains on the Needles line at 100 miles per hour, but the coming of lightweight streamliners reduced their maximum speed to 90. While BNSF upgraded the line to bidirectional signaling in 2003, the ATS system was not included in this upgrade, meaning that Amtrak trains operating across the desert were limited to 79 miles per hour while running on the wrong main. ATS was replaced with positive train control on the subdivision in 2021, which acts as a more advanced, in-cab version of its predecessor. After a long 1.0% climb out of the Cadiz Valley, eastbounds arrive at Goffs, 2,595 feet above sea level. While most trains simply roll through Goffs without a second thought, in times past, the town site was another of the stations supporting the constellation of mining activity in the eastern Mojave. Like the Bonanza King mine in the Providences, the New York mountains to the northwest of Goffs have been a subject of mining fascination for their rich deposits of lead, silver, copper, and zinc. Isaac G. Blake, a Colorado mining mogul, sought to tap into this wealth and provide a railhead for mining activity across the basins north of Goffs. Dubbed the Nevada Southern Railway, work began on a railroad grade from Goffs, which had fittingly been renamed Blake, to the New Yorks on December of 1892. In February of 1893, the right-of-way reached the mountains. Originally named Purdy, the town was later renamed Manville, after Allen Manville, a president of the Santa Fe. After a pause due to the Panic of 1893, work resumed, and in August of that year, trains began running to the campsite of Summit, but traffic levels remained low until 2 major ore discoveries caused a massive surge in revenue for the route. Gold had been discovered by Fred W. Dunn in 1896 in the Searchlight area of Nevada, and after a slow start, the Quartet Mining Company was incorporated in 1899 to tap into the ore found throughout the mining district. Simultaneously, new mining activity was taking place 60 miles to the west. The copper world mine in the Clark Mountains northwest of Ivanpah was for decades thought to have had potential, but it took until the Ivanpah Smelting Company of Los Angeles purchased the claim in September of 1898 for mining activity to ramp up. Both the Copper World and Searchlight mines would provide a critical traffic base for the Nevada Southern. In 1902, the railroad was extended from Summit into the Ivanpah Valley to better serve the mines in the Clark Mountains. Santa Fe purchased the Nevada Southern later that year and renamed it the California Eastern Railway, but the arrival of the SPLA&SL to Ivanpah in 1905 shifted copper traffic to the new railroad. Thus, while Santa Fe was hesitant to build into mining districts, it nevertheless pivoted its focus towards Searchlight. Incorporated on April 16, 1906, the Barnwell and Searchlight Railway Company finalized grading on its line in November. Manville, which was renamed shortly thereafter to Barnwell, was connected via rail to Searchlight by March of the next year. While the Quartet Mining Company had completed a narrow gauge railroad from the mine to their mill along the Colorado River, the completion of the 23-mile-long Barnwell district marked both the first connection Searchlight had to the national rail network and Santa Fe's first foray into the state of Nevada. It would remain the only one, as after a fire destroyed Barnwell in 1908 and the mine output dwindled, Santa Fe began cutting back service on the unprofitable line. Mercifully, a washout on September 23, 1923, allowed Santa Fe to petition the ICC to abandon the route, and Santa Fe's sole line to Nevada met its end on February 18, 1924. In the meantime, Blake had been renamed Goffs in 1901. The station site served as a loadout for ballast, but this too waned and ceased with the coming of the Depression years. In May of 2005, the California Cultural and Historical Endowment awarded the Mojave Desert Heritage and Cultural Association $500,000 to fund the creation of the Mojave Desert Archives. Construction of the library, which was built to the same specifications as the since-razed 1902 depot, was completed in September of 2008. The archives joined the renovated Goffs Schoolhouse in providing a repository of knowledge for the Mojave Desert, and its location contains thousands of documents related to the history of the region. West Goffs is the western terminus of sections 1 and 2 of the BNSF triple tracking project in the Mojave. By 2016, the grade out of Needles had become a significant bottleneck for westbound traffic, and BNSF began studying the possibility of adding a third main on Goffs Hill. By 2018, the design was completed, and after a lengthy review, our permit was granted in February of 2020. However, the pandemic put construction on hold until 2022. Segments 1 and 2, which covered the 30 miles west out of Needles, required less filling than segments 3 and 4 between West Siberia and East Ash Hill, but the expansion required the construction of over 50 new bridges, 100 culvert extensions, and 3 separate points where existing tracks were cut into the newly built main line. Other line-side infrastructure also needed to be shifted over to accommodate the third track. BNSF employs automated hotbox detectors to scan passing trains for any bearings that fall outside of an accepted range of temperatures. If the infrared scanner picks up an abnormal reading, it will broadcast a radio message telling a train to immediately stop and inspect the hot axle that it's identified. When cutting in the third main, BNSF construction crews needed to move both these detectors and track lubricators as conditions demanded. Triple track lubricators were not commercially available, so crews instead added an additional unit to help keep the new track greased. For westward movements heading across the Seligman subdivision, BNSF dispatchers will keep track of a train's progress up Yampai Hill between Pica and Yampai, which, although significantly shorter than Goffs' 30 miles of 1.4% climb, has an equal gradient profile. In times past, how well a train performed in climbing up Yampai would dictate the order of trains released by the BNSF dispatcher out of Needles, but with the third track construction project, faster westbounds now have the opportunity to expedite their journey up to the summit. Homer once housed a telegraph and train order office, but this was removed in 1912. Today, the site hosts a pair of sidings, making the area a 5-track wide right-of-way. Homer is also the site of a new universal crossover, one that, like Ibis 9.2 miles to the east, allows dispatchers to route trains around slower traffic on their journey up the hill. The alphabetical station naming convention was broken by Bannock's presence on Santa Fe timetables. Founded in 1898 as a passing siding on the 1.4% westbound grade, Bannock is, like Homer, the site of a pair of sidings, one on each side of the main line. In addition to storing maintenance of way equipment, the sidings also serve as locations to set out bad-ordered cars and locomotives. During the summer months, engines flaming out is fairly common, especially with the high temperatures BNSF's ET-44C4s run at. To accommodate this, the team working on the third main track project dug a well at Arrowhead Junction to provide an emergency water supply for keeping trains moving or dousing a burning GEVO. The well was kept after the project concluded and sits at the site of the trailers that used to coordinate construction activities on the hill. Like Klondike, the great separation that starts here was the result of the 1923 double tracking project. From the point where the tracks cross US Highway 95 to Ibis, the two mains are significantly apart as they both make a southward curve towards the Colorado River Valley. The Dead Mountains are the last of the mountain ranges the tracks must curve around before they leave California, and the westbound track, like at Klondike, curves alongside their foothills to create as gentle a grade as possible at this steep rise in elevation. The westbound tracks form the southern boundary of the historic Camp Ibis. The camp was constructed in 1942 as part of General George S. Patton's Desert Training Center. The facility, which had the capacity to house over 10,000 troops, was used to train U.S. Army personnel in desert warfare techniques in the run-up to Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of French North Africa. In October of 1943, the name of the training center was changed to the California-Arizona Maneuver Area to reflect its new purpose. With the Mediterranean theater of operations shifting to Sicily and then to Italy, the facility became a general training camp, and over 1 million Army personnel trained there before it was deemed surplus on March 30th, 1944. The Mojave has long been an ideal training ground for the U.S. military due to its remoteness and the ease the railroads provide for troop movements. Additional CAMA camps along the Santa Fe included Camp Danby, Camp Essex, and Camp Goffs, and when Operation Desert Strike, the largest U.S. military training exercise since World War II, took place in the desert in May of 1964, many of these campsites were reused as unloading points for the 100,000 troops and accompanying material participating in the exercise. Camp Ibis was named after the station of Ibis. Originally known as Ibex, it served as a watering stop for manned helpers on Goffs Hill until its closure in 1928. As freight tonnage waxed and waned throughout the last century, the helper pool at Needles was abolished and re-established, and while DPUs for a while rendered manned helpers irrelevant out of the terminal, they have made a resurgence in recent years. Symboled the KNEE, pairs of GE wide cabs can occasionally be found racing upgrade to assist struggling westbound trains. Kleinfelter was named for Peter K. Kleinfelter, who operated a gold mine in the mountains above the tracks here until legal trouble forced it to close in 1897. Originally, the site was called Sacramento Springs, and after mining operations shut down, Kleinfelter's water remained important for filling Santa Fe's thirsty steam engines. During the time when Camp Ibis was open, troops dug foxholes and other defensive positions in the hills around Kleinfelter to simulate the conditions expected in the Sahara. The curvature of the subdivision increases considerably at Kleinfelter as the tracks begin their final descent into Needles. The gap that the Sacramento Wash forces between the Dead and Sacramento Mountains allows for a natural path towards the river, but the proximity of the wash to the tracks increases the likelihood of catastrophic washouts. Appropriately, the Needles subdivision has one of the highest bridge per mile counts in the entire BNSF system, with at least one bridge per mile providing drainage. Even with them in place, the area between Goffs and Needles is particularly washout prone, and during the summer months MOW crews are kept busy, moving riprap along bridges and clearing out brush underneath culverts to keep the water flowing. Java was once the site of a telegraph and train order office. Before radio communication was introduced on Santa Fe trains, dispatcher instructions to the stations along the district would be delivered via code line strung up alongside the tracks. Passing trains would pick up paper train orders, which would instruct them on how to proceed until arriving at the next office down the line. Until the Java train order office was removed in 1912, its orders would have covered the distance east to Needles and west to Ibis. A brief grade separation was added to the main line at the station site of Khartoum, just west of West Needles, as part of the double track upgrades of 1923. Like the splits at Ibis and West Siberia, the eastbound track eliminates a half mile or so of distance, allowing for trains coasting into town to shave off precious minutes on their journey. Needles was first sighted by colonial authorities when missionary Francisco Garces worked his way up the Colorado River in 1776. The area was named the Needles after a geographic feature to the southwest of the town site, which in turn had been named by Lieutenant Emil Weeks Whipple in 1854 while conducting one of the congressionally authorized Pacific Railroad surveys. A two-story wood depot was built upon the arrival of the railroad and served as the Southern Pacific's headquarters in town. SP, and later Santa Fe, operated an extensive network of support infrastructure across across the main track from the depot, including an ice deck and inspection facilities. Like East Tower, an operator and needles governed train movements in and out of the yard to expedite traffic out of town. Since Goffs Hill starts less than a mile west of the station, allowing trains a good run at the grade was critical for operational efficiency and to prevent stalling, so the yardmaster would be kept busy keeping the main line clear. On September 6, 1906, a fire destroyed the depot, with 2 people tragically losing their lives in the blaze. Like Barstow's depot, which itself would be burnt down 2 years later, Santa Fe spared no expense in building a new, fireproof structure to house their freight agency, hotel, and Harvey House. Opening in May of 1908, the El Garces Hotel cost $250,000 to build, and quickly became a landmark for both its size and the use of the classic revival style, unique in an area where many large stations defaulted to using Mission revival styling. Known as the crown jewel of the Harvey houses, El Garces suffered the same fate as the other Harvey houses along the Needles subdivision, and the restaurant was closed in the fall of 1949. After Santa Fe vacated to move their facilities to another property in 1988, a local group called the Friends of El Garces was formed to pressure the city of Needles into purchasing the station. In 1999, this was accomplished, and in 2013, the city began a $10 million investment to restore the depot to its former glory. The next year, it was opened as a multimodal transportation facility, and in 2016, passenger service was finally restored to the grand old structure when an Amtrak waiting room was opened inside its majestic interior. While the hotel is much quieter than its heyday, railfans standing on the platform after dark can still bask in the remnants of the station's opulence that cast long shadows on passing trains. In between mainline movements, however, the amber glow of the yard lights highlight the quietness of the facility. Not much work is done, though helpers and occasional bad-ordered units are set out to get light repair on the tracks adjacent to the Y. Today, BNSF train crews wait on the site of what used to be the hotel's east wing to board outbound trains. While the loss of the wing in 1961 is tragic, weary train crews ending their journey from Winslow, Barstow, or Bakersfield are more likely grateful for the parking lot that now occupies the former hotel site. Long pool runs from Bakersfield, which bypass a crew change in Barstow, are especially taxing on crews, as to arrive at this point they will have had to have crossed both Tehachapi Pass and the entire Needles subdivision in their allotted 12 hours. After brief pleasantries, the crews board their trains to once more face the grueling struggle of operating trains across the southwestern desert. As the trains depart the shadows cast by the El Garces, they are tracing the steps of thousands of trains and crews before them, ghosts that offer color and character to what many consider to be an otherwise dull environment. However, if you've been paying attention, the allure of the Mojave and its harshness, its history, and operations just might be calling to you. Maybe someday, we'll see you out there.
Morning sun, a BNSF train charges through Amboy by tank cars and headed towards Carton Pass.
It's like we see a train, and 5 minutes later, another train comes. But that was what we thought. Now we had to wait for a half an hour for another train. Now there are 2 trains coming, both eastbound.
I've been coming out to the desert for a while. Growing up in an extremely loud and busy area like Riverside, it was often hard to find the opportunity to take time and sit. And being in the Mojave, in such a quiet, still environment, was something I desperately needed. To this day, the desert remains peaceful in a way that I can't easily put into words. Having the opportunity to wait for a train, knowing that another one always will come, but knowing that you're in the desert's timetable, not the other way around, is humbling. I've learned over the last few years that to be a railfan is to be in a constant state of grief for what once was, but the Mojave has remained mostly constant. It's one of the few locations in California that's remained mostly unchanged since I was a kid, and experiencing that continuity spread out over 20 years is soothing. And that quietness and continuity is needed. If I haven't convinced you up until this point to go out to the Mojave, to take time away from your busy life to travel out here, maybe this will do. More than any other place I've ever been in, the Needle Subdivision imposes upon those visiting it the mandate to live life at its pace. The video hasn't shown it, but while every trip I've taken out to the desert has been punctuated with huge bursts of train traffic, those in-between points have been filled with suffocatingly hot, still silence. With no cell coverage and nothing else to do, you just have to sit, wait, and think, and even after a while, thinking becomes too hard. It's the closest I've ever come to being in a meditative state while railfanning. It's reinvigorating, just being. As a kid with a lot of noise that I didn't know how to process, I always felt like I wanted to go back there, but didn't realize until I was an adult that it was really the only place that I felt that I could have any internal peace. That's the desert's greatest gift, in my opinion. Not the beauty, not the history, not even the trains, but just the excuse to be so far away from everyone and everything else that you just stop caring and exist. So go out there, take plenty of water, and be prepared to sit, wait, and be. The Mojave will have plenty of gifts to give for those willing to trek into its depths. Thanks for watching.
While this train is headed towards Baghdad, another train is also headed towards Baghdad. We'll capture that, and we already captured the other train. Out in the distance you can see a little light. Right there. Right on the left-hand corner. That's where the train is. That's where the westbound, that's where the eastbound is. The westbound. Here's the other train. Woo! Here's the other train. Hooray! This train has a variety of engines, including a BNSF